Hey, hey, how's it going? Good morning. Can you believe it's been 2 weeks since we last saw each other? I can't believe it. That week that we were gone felt so long and so short at the same time. I hope you guys had an awesome Memorial Day weekend. I know that plans were probably different than normal. It's hard to get people together for a grill out, or like my wife and I were supposed to go to Michigan to go hang out at a lake there, but that didn't get to happen. Just things are different right now. So I get that some things didn't happen, but we still had a good time just being off and like enjoying a time to do nothing, which was great. So I hope you got some time just to chill. That day off of school is probably really nice too. Hey, I hope you guys are doing okay. I honestly am not concerned. I just care about you guys. I hope you're doing okay. It's been a long time since schools closed their doors and the church was closed as well. It takes a toll on people, but I hope you're doing all right and that things are starting to look a little bit better. Anyways, they're looking better for me on my end. I got to come back to the church office a couple weeks ago to work. That was a big encouragement just to be in the building, and things are opening up around here. I'll fill you in just a little bit, but as I look at the summer and seeing how things are changing around here, it just gives me a lot of time to look at the potential of what we could do this summer to be together. So let me fill you in on a couple things that are coming up this summer because things are changing. So hopefully you can see what's coming up and it'll be good. So the first big announcement, this one's huge, is look at this hair. It's so long. You know what you should do, guys? I'm not this tech savvy, but I should get you a back shot too. I told you I was going to do that. Look at that. Oh, it is the thick mane right there. Anyways, one of you guys, if you're tech savvy, after this is all done today, this video, go back to the first video that we did, the last dating talk that we talked about on video, and screenshot my hair in that video, and then put that picture next to my hair in this video to see how much it's grown in the last 60 days. Because I was supposed to get a haircut before COVID time happened. Like I was already due for one, and I put it off because I just didn't want to go. And then they all shut down, so I haven't been able to get one. So my hair is like growing for, I don't know, 8 months now. Yeah, close to 8, maybe 7 or 6, but it's a long time. Anyways, that's not that important. The first announcement is the same as it's always been. The Discord group is still open. You can check out the link in the description of this video. It's like an invite link for Discord. You just jump on there, you sign up with your real name, and you use Discord primarily for Wednesday nights. We do Jackbox games on there every week, and you can jump on and play with us through Discord. It allows me to share my screen so you guys can play the game with me. If you have questions about how that works, let me know. I'll help you out. It's not too bad. We've been doing it for a while now, so I won't get into detail on it. The other thing about Discord, too, is that it's up 24/7 all the time. So if you want to get on there and leave a note for everybody or share a prayer request in there, you can. I check those out every day. I pray for you guys every day, and if you have prayer requests in there, I pray for you guys right then and there. There are small group leaders who are on there as well. It's great to see them interact with you in the chat part, and they also are praying for you, too. They catch all those and pray for you guys. So use that where you can and as you can. That's still running. The big different news about Discord, though, get ready. If I could drum roll with all of you guys in the room right now, I would, but you're not here. So pretend we're all drum rolling and it's really, really loud. All right. This Wednesday, June 3rd, we are going to do Jackbox games live in the middle school room. Yes, live. So it'll be the same time. You just need to be in the church building at the middle school room at 6:15, not 6:30, because I got to get you all set up together so we can work out like physical distancing and all that stuff while we're in the room. But 6:15, Wednesday night, June 3rd, till 7:45-ish, Wednesday night, June 3rd. We'll play the games together here. You need to bring a device with you, or you need to borrow from somebody. So while you're here, if you don't have a device, you might not be able to play right away. I've got a couple that I can borrow you, and hopefully they work. If they don't, then we're just out of luck. But if you've got like an iPad or a phone or something that you can borrow from a friend in this room, remember, we can only have so many people playing at once anyways for the main game. So you can watch on the screen while everyone's playing and then swap a device with somebody to get in on one. That's all you need to bring with you. And we're just going to do Jackbox in the middle school room together. If you can't make it to that night, it's no big deal. You can still play Jackbox with us on Discord. We're going to have it all hooked up like normal. It'll be exactly the same for all of you who have been playing with us the last few weeks. If you can't make it here on Wednesday, you can still play with us. We'll hook up Discords. We can all talk to you and all hear you, and you can hear us. and we'll have the game board all lined up, and you can play from your home. But there'll be people in this room who can play as well, and we can play together. So if you want to come, just show up. I'll be here regardless with everything set up. If nobody's here, I'll just be in this room by myself and play in Discord Jackbox games with you guys there. But I hope that you guys can make it and we can play together and be in the same room together. That would be super cool. So, and everyone's invited. So not just students, like small group leaders, I would love to have you there. It'd be so fun to hang out and be there together just to reconnect and be in the same room and laugh together is good. So this Wednesday, don't forget, it's going to be good. This Wednesday, 6:15, be in this room. 7:45 is when we end. All right. I haven't mentioned Nerf War for a while because there hasn't been any updates, but it's back. Nerf War is going to happen. I'm aiming for late June or early July, so in a couple weeks. So get your Nerf gun ready. If you don't have one, go get one. If you don't want to get one, that's fine. You can borrow some. When I get the date, I'll let you know that the day I get the date, I will tell you guys, and it'll be all set up to go. I've got some great ideas for how we're going to put this building together. Time-wise, we're looking for about 2 hours, so probably like 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., whatever date it is, I imagine. So I don't know what date it is, though, so I can reduce those as we go. But be looking at around late June, early July for that event to happen. Here's the first official event with a date that I can tell you on that. We're going to do this on this date. On June 24th, from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., we're going to do a bonfire and worship music night. And we're just going to be out in the Oakwood fire pit outside, and you just show up here at 8 o'clock. You don't have to bring anything with you. Just come and hang out. We're going to do like field games out in the big bowl, like soccer and stuff like that for the first half hour or so. And then once the fire's up and running and things are starting to get dark outside, then we'll get you some marshmallows and s'mores and all that stuff. If you want to bring like hot dogs or whatever else, something else to cook over the fire, you can. I won't have hot dogs or condiments or anything like that. But anything you want to try to roast over the fire, you can bring it. But I will have some more stuff for you, and we can do it there. We're going to combo with the high schoolers, too. So it'll be a high school, middle school combo event. And we'll do the s'mores and field games all together. And then we're going to do some worship music. So any middle schoolers here who want to do, like who have been on the worship team this year and want to do some music, let's work together and see if we can get you going for worship music that night. We obviously don't have any power out there. So if you play the keyboard or anything that gets get plugged in, we can't do it. But if you can bring an instrument out there and you can work together with the worship team, we can do some jams out there. And then hopefully we'll have some high schoolers who want to do some worship music too, and we can all play together and sing together. So June 24th, 8 to 10 p.m., right out the Oakwood Fire Pit. We'll see you there. You don't even have to sign up. You just show up. It'd be great to have you there. Another one here. This one's big. There's no date yet set for this, but I'm getting the details like early this week. I'll let you know once I get more. But Becky is doing some like backyard Bible studies, backyard Bible clubs this July. I know she's looking to do it for the whole month. Not that we're going to be doing stuff for the whole month, but getting people at backyards for that. It's kind of like a VBS, a Vacation Bible School in a backyard, but not really. It's more like Becky does kids programming on Wednesday nights, and instead of doing it in the building, she's going to take all the stuff they normally do on Wednesday nights over to someone's house and do that in the backyard with a bunch of kids in the neighborhood, at different neighborhoods around our area. So we are going to team up with Becky, not for the whole month, but for part of the month. Like maybe a week, we'll help her out with some of those. And then if you really enjoyed it or want to keep going or whatever, then you can talk to Becky and maybe she'll let you help out for the rest of the month for some of those things. But so because the mission trip's canceled, this is kind of like our backup plan. We're going to do this instead so that we can still serve and do some teaching and spread the gospel in our communities. So if you're interested in being a part of that, you need to let me know like this week, because we got to start training like in the middle of June. I got to get the details from Becky, which I'm working on now, so that I can then share with you what we're doing and teach you how it all works, so that when our time comes in July, we'll be all set up and ready to go. So please let me know. You can type it in chat is fine. I'll see it on Sunday, but I prefer if you leave a comment on the video so it's permanent, then I can see that. Or if your family, this would be the best, if your family can send me an email or a text message that says, hey, or my student's interested in being a part of the trip or whatever, please do that so I know who to contact when I get the details and I can start emailing things out to you guys. So should be really fun. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll fill you in as much as I can. I don't have a ton of information right now, but I will very soon. And then the last thing, too, is that there's a whole bunch of stuff coming down the line. I just can't give you the dates or what's exactly happening because there's a lot I want to do and not as much time to do it. So we're weeding through what we can and can't do and when. So I'll fill you in as soon as we can. But do know that we're trying to do weekly meetings at the church through the summer. So this June 3rd one that's this week is the first bit of it. We're going to try to keep meeting every Wednesday here at the church and do stuff together through the summer. Since we missed out on our 2 months before, we're just going to put our 2 months in the summer. So just so you know, things are coming down the line. So I hope you're excited. I'm super pumped. I can't wait. Like, it's going to be great. It's going to be so great. So I hope to see you there. Let me know if you have any questions or any concerns or anything, and I'll fill you in as much as possible. All right, let's get into what we're talking about today. I'm going to show you this actually. My printer went haywire and printed everything landscape or portrait today. Right? No, this is landscape. So my paper's like really wide, so it's hard for me to read. So I don't know. That was funny, I guess. It was funny for me. I don't know why the copier did that, but it did it. So remember 2 weeks ago, we introduced the topic of communion. We went through a whole bunch of stuff of what communion is. We joked around at the beginning of how communion kind of sounds like or looks like a mid-sermon snack, where like once a month, Oakwood says, hey, let's feed our congregation, and we'll give them a little like oyster cracker, and we'll give them a little cup of juice, and that'll hold them over for the rest of the sermon. And it looks like that on the outside, but that's not what communion is. We talked about last week how, or 2 weeks ago, that communion is like a symbol. It's something we do to remember something from the past. So it's not that we get a snack. It's that we're doing something to remember something else. It's kind of like it's a symbol. It's like, it's a tradition maybe. A tradition's a good one too. Like your Christmas traditions, you open presents or you go to a grandparent's house or whatever your thing you do every year. We do that every month here at Oakwood. And other churches do it every week. Some churches do it every quarter, like every 3 months or whatever. It changes church to church, but we do it as a thing to symbolize something else. 2 weeks ago, we talked about how there's a lot of like Jewish marriage tradition in communion. So like the words that Jesus used in the Last Supper in John 13 and John 14, like with passing the cup and talking about the Holy Spirit coming and being like a friend or a mentor to us, and how Jesus is going to leave and build a home for us. Like that all stems from Jewish tradition, which is really cool and really interesting, but we may not be privy to that as a Western reader of the Bible because we didn't grow up as a Jew. We didn't grow up 2,000 years ago in Jewish time. So we wouldn't know that necessarily. There's a whole bunch in that conversation. I did a whole video on it 2 weeks ago. If you missed it or you just can't remember any of it, go down to the description. I've linked to the video there. You can rewatch it. I thought it was great, but that's just me because I'm teaching. If I didn't think my teaching was great, then I'm in trouble. Anyways, go check it out. You can fill yourself in on what you missed last week if you missed it, or if you can't remember, it'll give you a little jog to your memory on what it is. This week we're going to finish our talk about communion by looking at the specific words in Scripture when Jesus says, "Do this in remembrance of me." So when Jesus does the Last Supper, he passes out the bread, breaks bread with the disciples. He passes out the cup to share and dip the bread in. He says to do these things for each element. So he breaks the bread and he says, break the bread and do this in remembrance of me. And then they pass the cup and he says, do this in remembrance of me. And like, for one, why does he repeat that? Like I remember in college and in high school, my teacher said, if a professor or a teacher ever repeats something, it's going to be important. It's going to be on the test, basically. You got to remember it. And Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me twice at 2 different times at the same Last Supper. So we got to talk about those words. Like, why does that matter? Why is that such a big deal that we have to remember what's going on? And then remember, too, that during this time, when they're having the communion, like, Jesus is making some big declarations. Like, it's not just like a bunch of guys sitting around the table having a meal together. That's what it is at its very base. The core of it, though, like Jesus is saying, I am the Messiah. He took the third cup, the cup of salvation that we talked about last week. That cup is set aside in that tradition for the Messiah to take when the Messiah comes to earth. And Jesus takes it and passes it and says, hey, we're going to share this together. I am the Messiah is what he's saying. So we're remembering part of that in there too. It's just this big thing. Like communion, like that Last Supper and communion itself is a huge, huge thing. And so when Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me, part of it is, let's remember this Last Supper. Part of it is remember who Jesus is. And part of it is for like Jewish people forever to remember that third cup, that cup of salvation is reserved for the Messiah. And Jesus took it and claimed his messiahship. And so whenever we remember that, like we remember that Jesus is God. Jesus is the Messiah. He claimed it right here. So don't let me get too deep in the woods. I'm talking about all these different things. We're looking at the words, do this in remembrance of me. And I don't know. I got this author that I love. He's super awesome. His name's Matt Michelatos. We went through a couple of his chapters in the fall from a book called Night of the Undead Christian or something like that. That was a different book. I've got that book. That book is great, by the way. You can read that one another time. It was one on the Acts of the Apostles or something like that. Wish I could remember. Into the Fray. There we go. Sorry, I didn't write the book name down. The book is called Into the Fray. It's like a modern retelling of the book of Acts. And we read through a couple of the chapters in that 9 months ago. I love Matt Michelatos as an author. I think he's really funny. Most of the stuff I've read from him have been like fantasy books. They're not real, but he talks about real topics in it, things to think about. But he's able to play with it more because it's a fantasy thing. It's not a theology book, but it'll make you think about like deep theological things. And my favorite one from him, the first one I read from him, the one I love the most, is this book called My Imaginary Jesus. Oops, this way. Here we go. I love this book. Let me tell you a little bit about it because that'll give you the preface of what we're looking at today. So My Imaginary Jesus is a book about the main character who is himself. The main character in his book is Matt Michelatos. And he is like living his day-to-day life, and he has his Jesus with him, which is a physical person in this world. Like he could see him sitting across the table, and they have conversation. Actually, the opening chapter, he's sitting across from Jesus at a cafe, and they're talking about stuff. And a man comes in and can actually see Matt's Jesus, and the man punches Jesus in the face because he doesn't think he's a real Jesus. And Matt gets mad, and Jesus runs away. And Matt says, well, how do you know he's not the real Jesus? And the man who punched him says, well, because I'm the Apostle Peter. Right? So Peter and Jesus knew each other, so Peter would definitely know who the real Jesus was. And the whole rest of the book is Matt running around with Peter and running away from like over 100 imaginary Jesuses that people have made up in their mind that aren't the real Jesus, but they have parts of who Jesus is in them potentially. For example, one of my favorite imaginary Jesuses in the book is Magic 8-Ball Jesus, who only speaks in yes, no, and maybe words. That's it. So you can ask him any question you want, and he only answers yes, no, and maybe. Kind of like a Magic 8-Ball. Have you ever seen those before? You shake them, and you ask it a question, and then you flip it over, and it has a little thing in there that tells you yes, no, or maybe. Some people like to think that Jesus doesn't actually communicate with them. He only gives you yes, no, and maybes, and they start to form that idea in their mind, and they think that's who Jesus really is, and that's not the real Jesus. And Matt makes a big deal out of that in the book, and he has an adventure, and Magic 8-Ball Jesus, shows up and does his thing, and you have to read about what actually happens with him. And there's 100 other crazy imaginary Jesus in there. There's like political power Jesus. There's hippie Jesus. There's so many good ones. It's like legalistic Jesus. They're so good. There's many of them. And Matt could write the book. Mr. Michelatos could write the book each chapter to say why this Jesus is wrong and why this Jesus is wrong. But instead of doing that, he could have done that. But instead of doing that, he goes on an adventure and interacts with all of the Jesuses in some like crazy thing to disprove why those Jesuses are not the real Jesus on his search to find the real Jesus of the Bible. So that's kind of what the book is all about. It's a great read. He's from Portland, Oregon, and he uses some interesting language sometimes that isn't necessarily appropriate for like young kids. So this is a book that I would have your family read first. I would say that it's not full of stuff at all. Like it's very little. But the little things like I couldn't give this to a sixth graders, and say, hey, this is totally fine. Like have your family read it first or read it with you and go through it. But all of the stuff he brings up is fantastic. It's so good. It's changed the way I think about who the real Jesus is in the fact that I want to be looking for the real Jesus, not just make up who Jesus is in my mind and live that Jesus out. So anyways, I want to read a chapter from this book because there's one chapter in here where he goes into communion and talks about those words, do this in remembrance of me. And it's so powerful. I was going to take that chapter and kind of dissect it and take the points Mr. Michelatos was making and then just type them out for you. And that takes a long time, and it just doesn't do justice to what that chapter is, because when you put yourself into the story and think about what's actually happening in that chapter, it's more powerful than me just like breaking it apart and trying to explain it. So I'm going to read this chapter out loud for you, and it's really short. Don't worry, it's 4 pages. It's no big deal. I'm going to read 4 pages to you, Then I'll give you my final thoughts afterwards, and then the video's over. So don't worry. We're not going to be here for the next 45 minutes reading a book. I just wanted to read this chapter with you real quick. So let me preface kind of what's going on before this chapter. So when you hear some things in it, and you're like, "What's going on?" I'll tell you what's going on. So Matt Michelatos is running from 3 imaginary Jesuses, and they're in a maze of some sort, like a downtown maze, or it's a maze in a building, and he's getting to the end of the maze, Michelatos says, and he gets to a center room it's dark and has some people inside, and that's where we pick up the chapter. So you'll hear a couple of Jesuses make comments before that. It's not the real Jesus; they're fake Jesuses. They're imaginary ones. So don't worry about those Jesuses. It's going to sound funny because the first chapter here says there's 3 Jesuses or something like that. So just so you know what's going on. Okay, here we go. This hair is crazy. Okay, sorry, I'm getting distracted. I'm looking at myself in the camera, so I'm getting distracted. Okay, my imaginary Jesus, about communion, Matt Michelatos. Here we go. A woman sat at a small wooden table, her gray streaked hair pulled back in a knot. She wore jeans, a plain blouse, and a cross around her neck. A simple meal lay on the table in front of her: meat, bread, and wine. Pete sat to her left, his legs folded under the table. He looked tired. And Pete is Peter, the Apostle Peter. He calls him Pete in the book. So Pete sat to her left, his legs folded under the table. He looked tired, but he smiled when I walked in. Jesus and Jesus and Jesus trailed behind me silent. Those are the imaginary Jesuses, not the real Jesus. So 3 Jesuses trailed behind me silent. I sat at the table. Pete took a sip of his wine. There was no plate and no cup in front of me. I wanted to introduce you to someone, he said to me. She and I are having communion, the Lord's Supper, the table, the Passover meal. I'll take it with you, I said. No, he said. For you, communion is tiny, tasteless wafers in a little plastic cup full of grape juice. Someone reads a few verses, you swallow the bread, you throw down the juice, and you think to yourself, Jesus, thank you for dying for my sins. You put the cup in the pew holder, and you're done. Later, someone comes by and cleans up the leftovers. I thought to protest, but I honestly didn't see anything wrong with the way he described it. He clearly disapproved, but that was basically what communion meant to me. Jesus had said, do this in remembrance of me, which meant, aren't we lucky to be saved? And we spend a minute making sure we're not sinning, because that would be insulting after he died for us and all. And then we drink our sip of juice, eat our nibble of bread, and we're done. What do you think a communion was like at first, Matt? I shrugged. I never thought about it, I guess. The first year after he died, do you think we threw back our cups, took 5 minutes to say thanks, and then moved on? He made a good point. I could spend more time than that reminiscing about a good meal. Probably not. We knew him, Matt. He changed our lives. Our thankfulness wasn't some theological construct. It was deep and true and unstoppable. He paused and put his thick hands on the table in front of him. This is my dear friend Mary. She would like to show you what it means to do this in remembrance of Christ. Mary smiled, the lines around her eyes crinkling up. I could tell you so many stories, she said. I wish you could have seen him when I first held him. Do you have children? I nodded. 2, I said, but tears came to my eyes when I said it. I blinked them back. 2 living. Then you know that when you hold your first little baby, the whole world changes. His fingers were so small, and he cried when he felt the cold air of the stable. It was the purest sound in the whole world. When we took him to the temple for his dedication, an old man named Simeon came to us and started praying and praising God. He took hold of Yeshua, Jesus, and told us this child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. Then, as if in an afterthought, he said, and a sword will pierce your own soul too. Of course, we had no idea what that meant, even though the prophetess gave some similar testimony that same day. But we had seen the angels. Have you seen angels? I don't think so, I said. Don't be afraid, he commanded me, but I was terrified. And we had seen the shepherds crowding in and around the manger, all wanting to touch him, and I didn't want them to hold him. He seemed so tiny and vulnerable, and they were so rough and filthy, and they stank. But Joseph said, he isn't ours alone, Mary. He'll never be ours alone. She stopped and took a small drink of wine. Pete put his hand on her shoulder and gently encouraged her to go on. One day when he was 12, we thought maybe he was with his friends. We were all traveling in a caravan, and at the end of the day, Of the first day's journey, we went to go look for Yeshua, for Jesus, but he was gone. We raced back to Jerusalem and spent 3 days searching for him. All of the worst possible thoughts tormented me in my mind those 3 days. Finally, Joseph found him in the temple teaching the teachers. Those old learned whitebeards bowed in careful in thought as our son explained the holy words to them. I was so afraid when we couldn't find him. My heart was like a frantic bird in a cage. I couldn't keep it inside. And when we found him, I was amazed and proud and so angry that he would do that to us. I thought this is what the old man meant when he said a sword would pierce my soul. But I was wrong. I can't imagine that, I said. I guess it would be like some 12-year-old kid going to a pastor's conference and all the pastors gathered around him in the hallway to hear his insights. He was a boy. They had high hopes for him, of course. He could be a great teacher, they said. They wanted him to move there, to live in Jerusalem. But Joseph said, he's of the house of Judah and firstborn. He's to be a carpenter, not a priest. But the way the men deferred to him, the way they leaned forward to hear his high voice read the scrolls, it reminded me of when the kings came to us, when Jesus was a boy. She smiled and her eyes focused on the middle distance. Pete leaned toward her and again touched her lightly on the shoulder. A great king, they said. The words the Magi spoke about him encouraged us deeply. Everyone always had something to say about him. It embarrassed me sometimes what people said. Her chin set forward, her jaw clenched down. I suddenly remembered that he had been born before she and Joseph married, and that the names he might have been called by others were not polite ones. Sometimes when he was speaking and all the other people were talking about him, people would say, "Mary, control your son." And I tried. But do you know the moment that broke my heart? I shook my head. When they had him on that cross. It was my baby boy, and I couldn't recognize him. Jesus' friend John had to tell me which cross was his. His face was battered and swollen, and blood was caked all over his sides, his arms, his feet. And when he pulled himself up to breathe, it made the most horrible noise, like he was drowning. She stopped and wiped at the tears pouring down her cheeks with the palms of her hands. "I'm sorry," I said. She didn't seem to hear me. She just talked on. I was standing below the cross in the horrible crowd, people jeering, throwing stones, throwing insults. John was standing beside me, holding my arm. Jesus' good eye moved back and forth over the crowd, and I thought he saw me. His eyes were so swollen I couldn't tell for sure. But he said, "Dear woman," and I looked up at him. He smiled, and his mouth was bloody and horrible. "Here's your son." John looked up to him, what was left of him, and he spoke to John. "Here is your mother." And John took care of me after that. She wiped at her face. One of the last things he said, broken and dying, "Take care of my mother." In the midst of his pain, in the center of his suffering, he stopped to take care of me. She fidgeted with her hands and whispered, "A sword that pierced my soul." Her fingers came upon the cross around her neck, and she jerked it back as if startled. She held it up for me to see, and it caught the dim light and flicked sparks into the dark. "Do you understand how painful it is for me to wear this?" Pete broke the bread and handed it to her. "This is the body of Christ," he said, "broken for you." She wiped the tears from her eyes and smiled at Pete. "Thank you, Simon." I looked up at the three Jesuses, and they flickered the same like the flames of a candle. "And the cup," she said, taking a sip, then placing it in Pete's hand. He took the cup and walked off into the darkness without a word. I stood to follow, and Mary reached out and touched my hand, her skin wrinkled and warm. I looked into her eyes, and she smiled at me. "God be with you." That chapter is so powerful for me. If someone just explained that to you, it wouldn't make near as much of an impact as when you're sitting in the room with Mary, the mother of Jesus, talking about how she watched her son die on a cross and all the things that she went through to raise him and the things that Jesus probably went through before the cross. It's such a powerful thing. And with Peter right there, one of Jesus' inner circle, and all the stuff that Peter saw and did and experienced with Jesus, and then seeing his best friend die on a cross. That's what communion is all about. When we take communion and Jesus says, "Do this in remembrance of me," yes, we're remembering that moment, the Last Supper, when he takes the cup and bread and passes it. but we're really remembering the life Jesus lived. Like everything. Like I can't imagine. There's no way we could. We're not in that time. We didn't see it happen. But if we were there, I think communion would make a big difference for us. We would take communion as a tradition to remember our best friend, to remember our son, to remember our family. I know I didn't have this written down, but I'm going to talk about it anyways, right? But I haven't gone through. I have a friend from Camp Victory who passed away a couple years ago. She's the person who hired me there. We were really good friends as we got to know each other over the years. And she died suddenly of cancer, like 40 years old, something like that, 41, 42. And I didn't think it would be that big of a deal. Like, it sucks to lose a friend. But when I went to the funeral, I mean, that was probably the worst I've ever cried in my life. It was a very sad moment. It's a sad day. And Facebook is being mean to me. It keeps popping old history, like old messages that she's sent me as like, hey, remember this time a few years ago when so-and-so or you and so-and-so talked? And that feels like a communion moment in that way, where when I read those messages, I read those to remember my friend Tracy. I miss her. Everyone misses her. That's so small compared to what Jesus communion is all about. Like, I just can't imagine trying to remember your friend that was like killed on a cross and all that happened. So I don't want to go too deep in here. You guys kind of get my point. Communion isn't just about the cookie and about the juice. Like, it isn't at all. It's not even about those things. It is about the Last Supper. That's part of it. But that's not all of it. We don't do communion just because Jesus said take communion because I said so. We do it to remember who Jesus is and who Jesus was. What he did, what he's doing for us now, how he died and how he rose from the dead. That's why we take communion, to remember that. And when Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me, it's so that we don't forget all that he's done and doing for us. So I'll end this video with these last quick thoughts, just action points for you guys. When we take communion, remember there's a lot tied into it, but remembering is a big reason why we take communion. So when you take communion, remember to remember. What did Jesus do? What do we read in Scripture about what he did? Also, when you remember to remember the things that Jesus has done for you now or in your lifetime, right? Not just in the past, not just in Scripture, but what is he doing now in your life? Maybe you need to get a journal or some Post-it notes, and when something happens that you know God was involved in that and it made all the difference or changed your life, write those down. And when you have communion, you'll have a whole bunch of things to look back on and say, thank you, Jesus, for doing this for me in my life personally. And I lastly want to make sure that we remember that communion is more of a serious thing than sometimes it looks like. You know, we talked about 2 weeks ago how taking communion is kind of like a rededication of our life in a way. It's saying yes to Jesus' marriage proposal. But it's also a serious time to remember, like, Jesus went through a lot. Like, a lot for that. And so, be a little serious about it. and remember, too, this is a side note, but it's not about the cracker and juice. It's not about where you take the cracker and juice. It's not about what day of the month you take the cracker and juice. None of that matters. It's about having a meal together, right? I love how Michelados has bread, wine, and meat on a table. It's not a cookie and a juice. Peter and Mary and Michelados are having a meal to remember their friend. And who knows, maybe communion needs to be more like that. That when we take time to break bread together, when we have a meal together, and we reminisce about who Jesus is and what he's doing in our lives. You could do that at Marty's Pizza down the road. Grab a friend, have some pizza, and talk about all the ways Jesus is working in your life. That's communion. It doesn't look like communion at church, but that's what communion is. It's remembering. All right. I think that'll do it for us today. Communion is a great, fun topic, but I hope that those two discussions will kind of change how communion looks for you, and that you'll see that it's just a really big deal. And it's important to break bread together and remember Jesus. So I'll leave you with all that. If you have any questions, let me know. You can leave it in the live chat or in the comments of this video. We'll talk very soon. I'm excited to see you guys on Wednesday. And with that, hasta la pizza. Have a great week.